All right, hello and welcome to another Expert Inside interview. My name is John Golden from Sales Pop, online sales magazine, and Pipeliner CRM, joining you as usual from a sunny San Diego. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Nahed Khairallah, who is in Dallas, Texas. How are you doing, Nahed?
Doing well, John. Thanks for having me.
Yes, of course, of course. And Nahed is a global HR strategist, spent over a decade transforming fast growing startups by turning HR into a driver of explosive growth. And this is what we're going to talk about today is how do you scale sales teams without breaking your culture? And Nahed, let's set a baseline to this. Explain to me how do some organizations end up breaking their sales culture through maybe less organized hiring?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And sales is the lifeblood of any organization, right? Especially when you're a growing organization,
Mhm.
and especially if you're just starting out and you're looking for that maximum potential revenue, profitability, and so forth. The sales team is one of those little babies you need to care for very well.
Mhm.
Otherwise, you won't have the same impact that you would if you took care of them properly. So let's talk a little bit about scaling sales teams and how you do it properly. A sales team, in order to succeed, right, especially at a startup, there needs to be very clear expectations on what the company is expecting. There needs to be the right level of support, but also something that I see a lot of companies forget sometimes is for a sales team to be successful, the entire organization should be set up in a way to enable their success.
Mhm.
So if you have a product team that is not communicating and working with the sales team, there's going to be a gap in what we're selling and setting false expectations to customers. If the marketing team isn't working with the sales team and supporting them, as opposed to it being a competition for resources instead of a complement, then you have one organization that's pulling in one direction and sales pulling in the other direction. So a lot of the things that I see fall around breaking culture in a sales team and growth is that the sales team over time as the company grows becomes isolated and purely focused on numbers
Mhm.
with disregarding what's going on in the rest of the organization and vice versa. So
Yeah.
it becomes a silo issue, it becomes an internal competition as opposed to all the functions working together to enable the sales team to actually achieve the maximum level of growth.
Yeah. So why do you think, Nahed, that it's 2025 and we still have this issue around sales and marketing alignment or sales align or other groups aligning with sales siloed? I mean, the reality of today is that your potential customer, the touch points with your organization are so many, right? They could be marketing, sales, they could be tech, that you need to have a unified approach.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. A lot of it, when I see from the HR perspective, is it stems from what are you rewarding each team in terms of
Mm.
accomplishments? If you are rewarding a marketing team to generate more eyeballs on social media versus creating viable customers into the funnel that sales can leverage, you're already setting expectations in a misaligned fashion. When
Mhm.
it comes to sales teams, right, if you're only looking at pure sales numbers, you're not looking at returns, you're not looking at refunds, you're not looking at cancellations and AR and so forth, then you're setting typically a misaligned expectation where each team is being incentivized to work in different angles, and hence, by human nature, especially if you know clearly what you're incentivized for and the metrics to follow, it becomes how do I get to these metrics through hell or high water,
Yeah.
and regardless of what's going on in the other organization. So something that we do from the HR perspective that's usually not thought of from the HR perspective is how do you make sure that you're aligning performance expectations across the organization in a way which is consistent, where no single department's requirements in terms of performance metrics and expectations are actually pushing in the other direction than any other department. And it happens a lot with marketing and sales because typically
Mhm.
marketing is trying to push customers towards sales, right, and get them to buy. And sales are the ones who are actually driving the sales. But there's a lot of nuances there where it could lead to some competition, and a lot of it's not only competition in terms of like metrics and so forth, but it becomes a war of resources
Yeah.
and allocation of dollars and so forth.
Yeah, and obviously, and let's be honest, some internal conflicts too, right?
Yes, definitely,
And
definitely. Human
yeah,
nature.
human nature. No, it's an interesting thing I had is that organizations, and you know better than I, but I mean organizations, and I often don't look at alignment of incentives across the organization. And
Correct.
oftentimes, as you say, they will actually incent one behavior over here and incent a different behavior over here that may actually ultimately be in conflict.
Yeah, yeah, it's I fully agree with what you're saying. A lot of times it happens piecemeal and it
Mhm,
happens in specific departments in isolation of what's going on. And the way I see it a lot of times is you'll have the leader of every function really work with, the CEO, founder, board leadership team in terms of assigning pretty much what are the metrics and performance goals,
mhm.
but they happen piecemeal. They're pretty much sized according to what that specific department's trying to do. And there's rarely any communication between these functions on really
Yeah.
coming up with this holistic view. The successful companies, what they do is that they start with, okay, what are we trying to achieve as a business, and how does each department actually play a role in doing that? And when you start from that point of common grounds and keep the conversation going from there, and you break it down into individual functions, then the leader plays a very active role in making sure that if they are veering off
Mhm.
from that common ground, they pretty much realign them to make sure that the success of an employee has to translate into the success of an organization, because it doesn't make sense for one department to succeed, another to fail, and we consider, yeah, we're actually building towards success. It's
Yeah.
not an internal competition.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately often what it turns into. The people go, "Well, I did my part." And you go,
Yes,
"Well, that's great that you did your part. If the overall company fails, that's not really gonna help you in the long run." So,
exactly.
and I think a lot of it falls on also on the shoulders of those senior leaders from those departments. Like, they should also be proactively getting together and say, "Okay, here's our goals, here's our vision, whatever. How do we help each other get there?"
Yeah, I agree. And there's a key deficiency I've seen a lot in companies that have those symptoms you're talking about. And a lot of it has to do with understanding the business holistically, meaning you need to understand what other departments do and what are the
Mhm,
indicators of their success as much as your own department. The reason that's important, because if you lack that context, then any business planning and strategizing you do is only going to be limited to your scope of understanding, which is going to be typically your function.
mhm,
So, in the HR world, we call this like the T-shaped professional. The horizontal part of the T means that have a very broad understanding of what the entire business does, and this includes all functions, not just sales and marketing, but even HR. Like, I don't think an HR professional at a leadership level can add any value if they don't understand the details of everything that their company does. And the vertical part of the T is be an expert in your own function,
yeah.
but have that broad organizational view to where you can use that expertise to influence decisions, but also understand what's going on and bake that into your strategies and your decisions.
Yeah, no, no, absolutely, no, I couldn't agree more. And you can't get away with that anymore. Like having sort of a departmental only only view. One thing I did at one company, Nahid, which was interesting. One company I was running was um, the sales team. We were having a bit of problem with gross margin,
Hmm.
and obviously salespeople are commissioned, so they have their incentives. So I went to the project and the onboarding and the delivery side, okay? And I said to them, okay, they're incented on bringing in the revenue, and we have to hit a revenue number this year, but we also have to hit an operating profit
Yeah.
um, target as well. So this is where you guys come in. I want you to question everything the salespeople do around what they're delivering, how they're delivering, what additional stuff what are they giving away for free, all of this
Yep.
kind of stuff. And I'm going to incent you on the gross margin. And anything we do go above our gross margin, you're going to get part of that as a bonus. And that changed the dynamic completely
Yep.
because the salespeople relied on these people, and now these people are questioning what they're doing. And it amazingly, it had a big impact on gross margin because it stopped all the stuff like just giving away, just handing out stuff like extra services. Oh, I'll get this person to do something for you, all in the name of being, customer service. But it wasn't really. It was because you were compensating for stuff that hadn't been done, or You were just adding to make yourself feel good.
Yeah, exactly. And that example you gave, I think, is a great one, because not only does adding that incentive on gross margin actually help the business and everyone really focus on that goal, but also there's shared accountability that comes
Yeah.
from it. You know, when you know that there's visibility cross team on what we're working towards, and teamwork is required to make it happen, because the salespeople are going to have to work with the onboarding people, customer success people, and so forth. When you have specific, especially on a sales perspective, when you have goals and metrics that really hold everyone accountable to do their part, but also have to work collectively to keep that visibility, typically you see better success.
Mhm.
And hey, sometimes it doesn't work for everyone, right?
Yeah.
People who it doesn't work for, hey, maybe not the right fit for you here.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. But it does. I mean, it's all about incenting proper behavior, and and questioning simple things like why are we overnighting a bunch of stuff at the last second, costing us a fortune? Why wasn't that done earlier in the process? Stuff that normally people would just ignore. But those are the silent killers to your bottom line.
Yeah, I have an actually perfect example to that. So I was working a couple of years back with an e-commerce firm, and during the COVID period, there's a lot of supply chain issues and so
Sure.
forth. So that company had decided out of the blue, with no data context or even any complaint from customers, that they want to reduce their delivery time and overnight most of the stuff they were building, from China
Mhm.
and other
Yeah.
warehouses in the Far East to the United States. The increase in shipping costs went up by around 80%, right? It was almost untracked up until, when there was like a financial audit happening, and they're like, hey, why are our margins almost nothing now? And, after they looked at it, is that, the supply chain team was incentivized to actually reduce delivery time. And the sales team was actually, incentivized to sell more.
Mhm.
And the marketing team was really incentivized, really just to broaden the delivery and the reach of the organization.
Right.
So more sales, more shipping, more more
Mhm.
less margins. So when they looked at it, like, hey, this is not good. Like, what's the purpose of us having shipping go from 5 days to 3 days when it's actually not a problem, and we don't have any issue with it right now? So
Yeah.
that whole thing spurred a whole conversation and a whole deep dive, just to reduce some of that overhead, which really cost the company a lot of money. Actually led them to layoffs
Yeah.
in a year from that time.
Well, it's like that old joke, isn't it? Where they say like, "Oh, we're losing money, but don't worry, we'll make it up on volume."
Exactly, exactly. Not always the case. To your point,
That was the
hundred
case.
percent, hundred
And
percent.
let me ask you one other question I had. This is something that everybody struggles with. I've never talked to a leader of an organization or people that I know. Nobody has ever told me that recruiting salespeople is easy. Everybody says it's like the hardest role to recruit for. Give me your insights into why that is.
Yeah, no, I think that's an amazing point, and yeah, I would say it's definitely one of the hardest roles to recruit for. The reason I say this is because a lot of times the way sales recruitment happens, a lot of it's like a gut feeling kind of check, just more like Q&A interviews and so forth. Um, you know, Studies from interviewing show that the best interviews, when they're not paired with any kind of assessment on skill set, personality, culture fit, and so forth, they're at best a coin toss, a 50%
Mm,
success rate. So if you are hedging your entire hiring of salespeople on a coin flip, then you're going to have a mixed bag in most cases. The best way to recruit, not only for sales but for any job, is to try and create a sales environment, and excuse me, a recruiting environment and a recruiting process that mimics the sales process and the actual job as much as possible. How
mm,
can that translate to sales? So if you're hiring for, let's say, a salesperson who's selling a SaaS platform, right? Most of their time is going to be spent on calls
yep.
with customers and driving them through the funnel. Well, why don't you give them an exercise where they have to prepare with your product and actually, as part of the interview, pitch you as a potential customer, right? And pay them for their time for the prep, right?
Mhm.
Any small investment you make as part of the interview process that gives you a realistic preview of performance on something that they're going to actually be doing on the job is going to be far more effective than just doing a Q&A interview, right?
Mhm.
And another situation is like, hey, maybe part of the job is writing proposals. Maybe you provide some kind of bespoke service, and you don't have like a quick and easy kind of pricing sheet. You're going to have to prepare RFPs and all that kind of stuff. So give them an exercise from an actual product where they can do that and assess their ability to actually deliver within the context and within the restrictions you give them. So those, from my experience and having done this for 15 plus years,
Mhm.
actually results in much better salespeople in the door than others. You're still going to have your occasional duds here and there, right? Because interviewing and hiring is not foolproof. There's culture fit, there's the person's ability to
Yeah.
execute, hitting targets, and so forth. But that is tremendously going to improve your chances from going from a coin toss to actually seeing that this person has the capabilities to at least meet the baseline of what you're looking for. And then, with experience in your company, they can go from there.
Yeah, and then I think the next part that often falls down is the onboarding part. Is like is you've gone through, made all this effort on recruiting, and then it's like the person starts, and you're like, yeah, learn, look at this stuff, and look at that. Oh, I'll talk to you tomorrow, or whatever. And we kind of do that thing where we just literally, as I would say, like, we just take them down the deep end and push them in and say
Yep.
swim,
Sink or
right?
swim. Yep.
Sink or swim. So I mean, I think that's also part of it. Part of it as well is making sure that you have a proper onboarding process in place.
Yes, yes. And so something I say a lot to founders and especially growing companies who typically suffer the most from this
Mhm.
is, before you hire anyone, make sure that you have a support system around them to set them up for success. Because if you don't do that, you're actually doing yourself a disservice as much as you're doing them a disservice. Because imagine going through the whole process of hiring a salesperson
Mhm.
who's actually good. And we just talked about how difficult that is, right?
Yeah.
And then having someone come in, you give them no context, you don't even
Mhm.
invest any amount of time to get them up to speed. And we call this in HR time to productivity. Like,
Right.
how soon can I get this person up to speed so they can actually start delivering the value I hired them to deliver? So if you don't spend the time to do that, you're actually delaying their time to productivity. It's not in your best interest as a company. So you're actually leaving thousands of dollars on the table. So great onboarding can have different shapes and forms, right? It starts with having clear expectations, having some form of documentation and what is it this person needs to do and so forth. But also, as a hiring manager, dedicating a portion of your time early on to make sure that you bring this person up to speed and give them really the headlines of what they need to be understanding. Maybe have them, go onto sales calls, observe, have them read some material as prep, work with the team and talk to certain people they need to talk to, and give them really all the baseline information they need to hit the ground running. Because the sink or swim thing, I mean, it's one of those badges of honor that a lot of startups are like, hey,
Mhm.
we move fast and we don't have time for this.
Mhm.
Well, guess what? You're actually leaving money on the table and you're setting someone up for failure, which will actually increase the turnover of your employees. And I'm sure no one wants to go through the hiring process again. So,
No, no, they don't. And to your point though, that is the key missing part, I think, because what happens typically is, what happens to that salesperson? They suddenly, 3 months in or whatever, they suddenly have a ton of attention on them, and maybe they're put on a performance improvement plan, and it's
yeah.
and a lot of the times it's not 100% their fault.
Exactly, and a lot of it, like from my opinion, at least, when that happens, it's not only look. Sometimes it is the fault of the employee, right? But
Mhm.
in most
Sure.
cases, it's not. In most cases, especially that early in the tenure, more times than not, I would easily say, if I want to throw a number out there, maybe 7 times out of 10, it's actually the company's fault,
Mhm.
starting with the hiring manager and just not setting that person up for success. And that could also mean sometimes that, hey, your hiring process isn't working. You're actually not bringing the right people in who can actually succeed in the environment you have. Because a lot of times, what happens in the recruiting process is we sell this honeymoon story that
Mhm.
this company is the best next thing after sliced bread, right? So,
Yep.
but in fact, when you're transparent in the recruiting process and you explain clearly what you do well and the areas maybe you need to work on, and really give a realistic preview of what the environment is, sometimes candidates self-select themselves out because they know that's not an environment they want to be in or can succeed in. So those are also things that I usually recommend for companies to do, just to save themselves the trouble of having to go through this again.
Yeah, and I think the final thing, Nahid, is we tend to like hire salespeople, and then maybe because they're remote and they're out in the field or whatever, we don't ever really introduce them to the rest of the organization, to the people who they may need later on, and we never kind of develop those relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, it's actually more accentuated remotely now, because
Mhm.
a lot of time, and I see this a lot, right? And I've been working with remote companies for almost 10 years now, even before it became a thing with
Yeah.
COVID. It is something where like culture building and relationship building has to be very deliberate in a remote culture because it can be easily forgotten. And I have been in many situations where employees have worked with people for years and have never even seen them
Yeah.
or met them. So to your point, I think part of the onboarding planning is you need to make sure that not only salespeople, but any role in particular, but mostly salespeople, because they rely heavily on their understanding of what the company can do, the product that we can
Exactly.
deliver, and setting expectations with customers, that having them early on be connected to the right people who can give them the information and support they need will actually help them do their job better and sell more. So as part of like an onboarding plan, what I usually recommend is that identify who are the key people that they need to be in touch with early on and have them be introduced within their first week
Yeah.
before they start speaking to customers, because they need to know who each person is, what they do, why is it important for the relationship, how would they be working together, and when should they be reaching out to them for what kind of information. Typically that sets them up for success and even gives the new hire a feeling of confidence,
Yeah.
and they're able to represent your company better, because there's nothing worse as a customer when you're met with a salesperson who you can tell is not really sure
Yeah.
of what they're saying, and every question you ask them, like, hey, I need to get back to you, I don't know. It doesn't instill a
Yeah.
lot of confidence in them, in your company, and your product.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And there's nothing worse than they're spending half their time going, "Who do I ask for this? Or who is this person? Who's that person?"
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Well, listen, Nahed, this has been great. All of Nahed's information will be below this video. But before we go, please do remind people what you do.
Yeah, so I am the founder of Organized Chaos, which is an HR advisory firm and also a podcast and newsletter. So there's a lot of free content available for people, just along the lines of the topics we've been talking about. So anyone who's interested can reach me on LinkedIn, but also visit our website organizedchaos.fyi. You'll have access, to the podcast. Also, like, you can sign up to the free newsletter and reach out to me if there's anything I can help you with.
Perfect. Well, thanks again, Nahed. Thank you for watching and listening. And I will see you all again very soon. Thank you.
Thanks, John.